Hi, Nikayas.
Hi, Carmen.
I'm so glad to be able to sit down with you and talk about your experiences in your line of work. So, I'm hoping that you would be able to share some valuable insight and possibly some advice for people who want to improve their communication skills. So, would you please introduce yourself briefly to the audience about what you do in your line of work?
Hi, I'm Dikayas. I am currently working in a church that is involved in a learning center for refugees, and I do preach in Chinese as well occasionally in this church.
Right. So you've been teaching at a school for refugee children. Could you tell me about some of the unique communication challenges you face on a day-to-day basis?
Because most of my students don't speak in English, the biggest communication problem we have is the language barrier, because our priority is teaching them English, but most of them don't understand English, and we have found that the fastest way to get them to learn is to speak purely in English and let them learn along the way as they listen. But because of that, they don't fully understand a lot of what we say, so the communication barrier is there, and there's a lot of challenges to be faced, especially in this area of language differences.
Yeah. So throughout your 1 year of teaching, what strategies have you found to be most effective in building trust and rapport with your students?
I found that the most important thing is to build a relationship with them, and sorry, the paper fell. I found that the most important thing is to build a relationship with them, and because they like to tell their experiences of what they go through as well. Even though there is a language barrier, they tend to try their best to tell us teachers about their day. They like to tell about what they did, and even though we don't fully understand each other at the moment, there's still some places where we still have to like double check with each other, is this what you actually mean? But even though there is a slight barrier, they still try to tell us about their day, and I feel like the most important thing to build their trust is to be there and listen. Even though we don't fully understand it, we are there to be in their lives, and the fact that we are listening, the fact that we are putting in time and putting in effort builds the relationship that we have with them.
And your curiosity in what they have to say also motivates them to use the language, right?
Yes, and because they have such a different culture from what we are used to, the curiosity is always there, and you would find yourself asking questions like, oh, why would you do this? And they would like to explain, oh, this is how it works in our culture. We do this in our culture. And when they are able to open up and share how they've experienced and how they have, like, what they have gone through, it really shows them that they can trust you with who they are.
So great. Moving on to your pastoral work in the church, you preached several messages to the congregation. So I'm curious to know how you would approach preparing a sermon, particularly in terms of structuring your communication and how you would bring the message to them.
I feel like because this is a mainly Chinese congregation, I do have a bit of a challenge in preparing my sermon because I am more fluent in English. But what I find helpful is that I would use simple Chinese, and that I would structure my sermon in a way where it's easy to understand, especially for someone like me who is not particularly fluent in Chinese. And I have found that it really helps to write down the entire sermon word for word instead of thinking of a sentence on the pulpit. Reading it would be a lot easier to get your communication through, because you have like thought of it beforehand. And I've also, because my mother is also a pastor and she is fluent in Chinese, I usually before I preach, I do go through the sermon with her so she can check my vocabulary, and she would help me run through it and see if the whole sermon flows.
Yeah. So in your experience of sharing messages, and this is something that very few people get to do. So like public speaking, for example, and so in your experience of public speaking like this, what techniques do you use to engage your audience and also to keep their attention throughout your message?
I find that for the preaching in the adults, I tend to find that adding illustrations would help, telling them stories that are relatable, telling them, helping them imagine situations that would apply easier in their lives compared to what we can pick up directly from the Bible. And I try to use light-hearted language so that they would be able to click into the mood instead of thinking, being too strict and too formal. But when they are able to relax, when they are able to be in a calmer situation, it is easier for them to absorb what I'm trying to communicate. And for the children, I found that adding jokes helps. So making them laugh is definitely an attention grabber. So whenever I teach them something, I try to add little funny anecdotes here and there so that they will try to pay attention so that they can enjoy the class along with me.
Yeah, that's true. So this question would be of great help to me. I mean, as a very easily nervous person. So what advice would you give to someone who is nervous about public speaking or communicating in front of an audience?
I think as a beginner, it is definitely very hard to go in front of an audience the first few times. I think even now, even though I'm quite familiar with it, I still find it sometimes I still do find it very nerve-wracking to be in front of so many people. But I've noticed that getting my adrenaline up helps, and I like to do this thing where if I get too nervous or too stressed, I like to go to a private corner and I would like to jump on the same spot a few times just to get my body ready and my heart pumping. And it kind of helps trick my brain into thinking that the nervousness is actually part of the excitement that I have to go up on stage, and it helps me get into the confidence, and it helps me focus on what I'm about to say instead of thinking about how nervous I am.
Yeah, I actually agree on that, because in my experience of performing a few dances with a group of friends, I tend to get very nervous before like going on stage. So, and I actually like do try to find a bit of time to just get my energy out. So
yes, definitely.
Yeah, so yeah, that nervousness just like completely is manageable at least.
Yes.
Yeah. So based on your experiences, what do you think are the most important communication skills to hone and learn for a teacher and a speaker?
I think one of the most important things is that you have to know your audience. You have to be sensitive to who your audience is. You have to pay attention to their body language. You have to see if they are able to understand what you're saying. Sometimes they might be looking at you, but it doesn't mean that they are understanding what you're trying to communicate. So it is very, very important that you notice their body language. You pause and you maybe you can ask them, like, do you understand what I'm saying? Or you could try to engage them in responding to you to see if they understand. But I think it's very, very important to see how your audience is reacting to what you're saying.
Yeah. Was there any recent examples of like students like actually pretending to know what you're saying instead of totally misunderstanding you.
Yes, I do have a lot of stories about that. Children like to say they understand even though they don't, just to get the class moving on. But I have this student who she tends to parrot along with what I say or what her classmates say, but in reality she actually does not fully understand what I'm saying, or she's not trying to understand what I'm saying. So in these situations it's a bit harder, but you definitely do have to pause, stop the class and say, hey, are you paying attention? Are you listening? Do you need me to re-explain the whole thing? Sometimes they would say, yeah, teacher, actually I'm not really fully understanding this. So in certain cases like this, you would have to find a different way of explaining what you were teaching. And sometimes you have to get them out of that studying mindset, because sometimes they find studying too boring and they tend to shut down. So sometimes I would actually ask my students to stand up and do a physical activity before sitting down and continuing my class.
Yeah, that's great. I think the report comes in handy also, right? Like your personal relationship with them.
Yes. So sometimes I would say, okay, everyone, let's stand up, let's do something, and be like, oh, teacher, you're gonna do this with us, right? And I'll be like, and I would be, yeah, we're doing that again, let's do it again, and let's get all excited for class again.
Wow, thanks. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences. And I've learned a lot from our conversation, and I'm sure all the others will too. So is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up?
I think one of the important things is that you have to can't be afraid of stopping and asking the person you're talking to if the communication is working. I feel like a lot of us, when we are communicating to someone, we tend to say, oh, I have already explained it, if you don't get it, it's your problem. But actually sometimes we have to pause, and sometimes even though it makes perfect sense to us, it doesn't necessarily make sense to who you're talking to. So it definitely helps to stop, and don't be afraid to ask the person you're talking to if they understand what you're saying. Don't be afraid to ask questions like, does what I'm saying make sense to you? Does it relate to you? It definitely helps if you are able to ask the person you're talking to if they fully understand what you're trying to say. Because in what I've learned in school, a lot, when you are talking, when you're explaining, even though it's the same words you've been saying all this while, sometimes they don't understand it all the time. So definitely take your time, ask if your audience understands you, and if they don't be afraid to find like a completely different way of communicating, because communication, it only works if the two are trying their best. It doesn't work if the listener is trying to help. But the communicator must also put in effort to change the way they're communicating if it's not going to.
Yeah, that's very true. So great, thank you again for your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.